Today we're going to be covering one of the more influential sociological explanations of crime, strain theory or general strain theory, also known as GST. This lecture is extremely important for comprehensive exams because it connects classical sociology, inequality, emotion, delinquency, victimization, and even modern topics like policing and terrorism. We're going to move historically from Durkheim to Merton, then to Robert Agnew's general strain theory. And one of the major themes you should notice throughout this lecture is that strain theory tries to explain crime not as simple evil or pathology, but as a response to outside social pressures, blocked opportunities, frustration, and emotional stress. Okay, so here's the roadmap for today's lecture. We're going to begin with the concept of strain itself, and then Durkheim's concept of anomie, and then we'll transition into Merton's strain theory and discuss the American dream, blocked opportunities, and the 5 modes of adaptation. After that, we'll move into critiques of Merton before shifting into Agnew's general strain theory. And from there, we'll examine the 3 major forms of strain: negative emotions like anger, empirical tests of GST, victimization research, theory integration, policy implications, and comprehensive exam takeaways. So, moving into why strain theory matters. It matters because it provides one of criminology's clearest links between inequality and crime. So, rather than simply asking, why are some people bad, strain theorists ask, what pressures or frustrations push individuals toward deviance? And this is a fundamentally sociological explanation of crime. Strain theories argue that social structure matters, opportunity matters, economic inequality matters, social experiences matter. Another reason strain is so important is because later versions, especially general strain theory, connect sociology with psychology and emotions. Crime becomes linked not only to blocked opportunities, but also to anger, resentment, humiliation, victimization, and stress. This is one reason why GST became enormously influential in explaining violence, delinquency, prison misconduct, substance use, bullying, victimization, and even collective violence. To understand strain theory, we begin with Emil Durkheim. Durkheim's major contribution comes from his work Suicide, published in 1897. Durkheim introduces the concept of anomie. Anomie refers to normlessness or weakened social regulation. Durkheim argued that during periods of rapid social change, modernization, or instability, traditional norms weaken and individuals lose behavioral guidance. Importantly, Durkheim was not primarily trying to explain street crime, he was trying to explain social order and social disorganization more broadly. For Durkheim, human desires are potentially unlimited. Society normally regulates those desires, but when regulation weakens, people experience instability and frustration. Durkheim believed that modernization disrupted traditional forms of social solidarity. As societies industrialize and modernize, collective norms start to weaken, and then individuals will become less connected to traditional moral structures. And this in turn will create instability, uncertainty, and deregulated aspirations. So Durkheim's key mechanism is the idea that unlimited aspirations create frustration. People always want more wealth, more status, and more achievement. Without social regulation, those desires become impossible to satisfy. This concept of anomie becomes foundational for Merton's strain theory. Robert Merton takes Durkheim's idea of anomie and adapts it to American society. In his 1938 work, Social Structure and Anomie, Merton argues that American society strongly promotes success goals, especially wealth and upward mobility, but access to legitimate means is distributed unequally. And this in turn creates strain. The central disjunction is between cultural goals and institutional means. Society tells everyone that they should achieve success, but not everyone has equal access to education, jobs, wealth, or opportunity. And this gap creates pressure towards deviance. And then we look at the American dream. Merton focused heavily on this. American culture strongly emphasizes wealth, achievement, and upward mobility. Success becomes culturally universalized. But opportunities are not universalized. And this means that lower-class individuals may internalize the same goals as everyone else while lacking legitimate opportunities to achieve them. Merton argues this blocked opportunity structure and generates pressure toward deviance. And this is why strain theory becomes closely connected to class inequality. Merton argues individuals adapt to strain in different ways, and here we have 5 modes of adaptation. Conformity means accepting both the goals and legitimate means. Innovation means accepting the goals but rejecting legitimate means. This is the adaptation most associated with crime. Ritualism involves rejecting success goals while still following legitimate rules. Retreatism involves rejecting both goals and means. Examples might include severe addiction or social withdrawal. And finally, rebellion involves replacing existing goals and means with alternative systems. Innovation is the most criminologically important adaptation. Innovators accept the cultural emphasis put on success, but they lack legitimate access to achieve it, and as a result, they pursue illegitimate activities. Think of the Wolf of Wall Street. Examples include theft, robbery, fraud, or drug dealing. Crime becomes an adaptive response to blocked opportunities. This is one reason Merton's theory is strongest at explaining utilitarian crime, crimes committed for material gain. Now, when we look at the strengths of Merton's theory, I think it has several major strengths we can acknowledge. First, it strongly connects inequality to crime. Second, it provides a clear sociological framework of which we can follow. Third, it explains why crime might emerge systematically in unequal societies. And finally, Merton's theory became the foundation for later strain theories, especially general strain theory. But despite its overwhelming influence, Merton's theory received several different criticisms. Critics argued it poorly explained violent crime and expressive crime. Others argued that Merton assumes universal success goals. Additionally, critics argued Merton lacked a clear emotional mechanism. Why exactly does blocked opportunity produce crime? Robert Agnew later attempts to address these weaknesses directly. Agnew also responded to criticisms claiming Merton's theory cannot be tested at the individual level. In his 1987 article on testing structural strain theories, Agnew defends classic strain theory. He argued that Merton, Cohen, and Cloward and Olin absolutely imply individual-level mechanisms. Agnew stated that the global blockage creates frustration and stress, making delinquency far more likely for individuals. Importantly, Agnew clarifies that strain is not deterministic. Not all strained individuals commit crime. Instead, strain increases the probability of delinquency. Agnew argued that Merton's theory is too narrow because it focuses primarily on economic failure and class inequality, so what Agnew did was broaden the strain theory dramatically. Crime can emerge not only through blocked economic success, but also from interpersonal conflict, victimization, abuse, rejection, and emotional stressors. Agnew and White's 1992 work became extremely important here. They argued that general strain theory differs from control theory and social learning theory because general strain theory focuses on negative relationships. And so now we move into general strain theory, which dramatically expands on strain theory. So the core mechanism here is that strain can lead to a negative emotion, and that in turn can produce delinquency or crime. So Agnew emphasizes emotional processes. Crime might emerge from stress, anger, humiliation, frustration, resentment, fear, or depression, and this emotional focus becomes one of GST's biggest innovations. So we look at the three types of strain. Agnew identifies these three major forms of strain, the first being failure to achieve positively valued goals. Second, the removal of positive stimuli. Third, presentation of negative stimuli. Agnew and White explicitly test these three categories in their 1992 empirical work. So looking at the failure to achieve goals, Agnew broadened Merton's concept of goal blockage. This issue is not just economic failure. Individuals compare aspirations, expectations, and outcomes, and strain can emerge whenever individuals believe they are not achieving their valued outcomes. And now we have removal of positive stimuli. This type of strain involves losing something valued. Examples include divorce, death of a loved one, job loss, or parental separation. These experiences generate emotional distress and instability. And now we have the presentation of negative stimuli. This form of strain involves exposure to adverse experiences. Examples can include things like bullying, victimization, harsh parenting, discrimination, or prison conditions. This becomes especially important in modern general strain theory research. One of Agnew's most important contributions to strain theory is emphasizing negative emotions. General strain theory focuses heavily on anger. Agnew argues that anger is especially criminogenic because it creates pressure for corrective action. Anger lowers inhibitions, increases perceived injustice, and motivates retaliation. Agnew and White explain that emotions like disappointment, fear, depression, and especially anger create pressure for delinquent coping. Now, Mazerol and colleagues empirically tested this emotional mechanism of general strain theory, and they found that anger mediates the relationship between strain and delinquency. This becomes major empirical support for general strain theory. Agnew and White conducted one of their earliest empirical tests of general strain theory in 1992. Using over 1,300 adolescents in New Jersey, they found substantial support for general strain theory. Strain predicted delinquency and drug use. Importantly, the two authors also show the conditioning variables matter. Brezina, 1996, focused on the coping responses to strain. Crime is only one possible adaptation. Individuals might also cope through legitimate or non-criminal responses. Now, one of the biggest refinements of general strain theory involves conditioning variables, and these factors shape whether strain produces crime. Examples include self-control, coping skills, peer influence, temperament, and social support. Agnew and White found strain effects were stronger when delinquent peers were high and self-efficacy was low. Agnew and colleagues further expanded general strain theory by integrating personality traits. They found that negative emotionality and low constraint strengthened strain-crime relationships. Hoffman and Miller statistically tested general strain theory using latent variable modeling. Their findings generally support relationships between strain, emotion, and delinquency. In 2003, Jang and Johnson examined strain and anger among African Americans. They found that strain predicts negative emotions, which then contribute to deviant coping. Brody and Agnew in 1997 examined the gender differences in general strain theory. They argue that males are more likely to externalize anger through aggression, while females are more likely to internalize emotions. Higgins and colleagues examined peer rejection through general strain theory. They found that social rejection becomes a source of emotional strain. Morris and colleagues' 2012 study applied general strain theory to prison environments. They found that prison strain increases inmate misconduct, reinforcing general strain theory's relevance beyond adolescence. Victimization research becomes extremely important within general strain theory. Barberi and colleagues' 2019 systematic review argues that victimization is one of the most important sources of strain because it is frequent, emotionally salient, and strongly tied to delinquent coping. Victimization may produce anger, fear, depression, and retaliatory behavior. General strain theory has also been applied to riots, extremist violence, retaliatory violence, and terrorism. Collective violence may emerge when groups experience perceived injustice, humiliation, or blocked opportunities. Now, when we look at general strain theory in policing, it has major implications for policing research. Negative police encounters might generate emotional strain, anger, distrust, and resentment. Examples might include things like procedural injustice, harassment, aggressive law enforcement practices, and discrimination. This becomes highly relevant for modern legitimacy policing research. General strain theory also has its share of criticisms. Critics argue that general strain theory is overly broad and difficult to falsify. Measurement problems remain significant. Barberi and colleagues note that victimization has been operationalized inconsistently across general strain research. Hershey's control theory provides a major critique of strain theory. Strain theories ask why people offend. Control theory asks why people conform. Hershey argues that many strained individuals never will commit crime, so this is just a major critique of strain theory. Not all strain causes crime. Burton and colleagues critique operational problems within strain research. Different studies measure strain differently, weakening conceptual precision. One reason why general strain theory became so influential is because it integrates easily with other theories. GST overlaps with social learning, self-control theory, life course criminology, and procedural justice research. Agnew and White specifically argue that GST complements control and learning theories by focusing on negative relationships. And with this said, we have a couple policy implications with GST. If strain contributes to crime, then reducing strain might reduce crime. Policy implications include reducing inequality, expanding opportunity for people, mental health interventions, trauma-informed care, and prison reform. So for my comprehensive exam, I'm going to try to remember these 5 major points. Durkheim introduced anomie. Merton linked crime to blocked opportunity and the American dream. Agnew broadened strain theory beyond economics. Anger became central in general strain theory. And finally, conditioning variables shape whether strain produces delinquency. So the overall final synthesis here, the major shift across strain theories is from a macro-social structure toward emotional processes. Durkheim focused on social regulation. Merton focused on blocked opportunities. Agnew focused on emotional reactions to adversity. And together, these theories explain crime as adaptation and emotional response to social pressure. But with this said, I thank you for your time and I conclude this lecture.